Welcome, Budget Advisory Committee members. This is Kristin Bell, and I am the Budget Director for the Tacoma School District. This is the first of a series of asynchronous presentations that we will provide for you for our budget education. Today, we're going to start off by identifying the different funds that we have, as well as go over some highlights about where our revenues come from. So before we get too far along, what I'd like to share with you is a resource that we've created that you're welcome to use throughout the committee times and conversations that we have. School district staff tend to have their own jargon, and we're notorious for using acronyms so often that it's almost like a separate language. So we have developed a vocabulary list of sorts that you can reference any terms that you're unfamiliar with. In order to access this list, you'll want to go to the Tacoma School District website, which is www.tacomaschools.org. Then once you're there, you'll want to click on Departments, then Business and Finance, and then Budget. And there will be a link there with a document that will have these items on it. Having said that, I'm asking you to stop us if you hear us using a term that you are unfamiliar with. We are intentionally going to try not to use acronyms, but just in case, please let us know if we're saying something that doesn't make sense or you're unfamiliar with, and we'll stop for you. I do ask you to do that. Thank you. Okay. Fund accounting, what is it? Well, essentially, we have six funds in the Tacoma School District, and you can think of those as like six separate bank accounts. And within each bank account, there's a very specific revenue stream and a very specific guidelines around the expenditures that must come out of that fund. And then you must not commingle those funds also. Starting with the ASB fund on the left there, the ASB fund is the Associated Student Body Fund, and dollars get into that fund through things like the students may have a fundraiser, or someone may donate just a flat donation. Many times, if you go to a football game and you have to pay a ticket fee to get in, those receipts would go into there. Perhaps receipts from ASB card sales, things like that. When it comes time to spend money out of that fund, those are the main rule with the ASB fund is they must be extracurricular in nature. They cannot be an academic expenditure. And the students must be in charge of how the money is spent and have oversight on that. So generally there's an ASB advisor or some kind of an adult that helps guide the student body in making appropriate decisions that are within the guidelines of the fund. But the student government does need to vote and include it in their minutes as to how they will spend those dollars. So the students drive that decision, and then the advisor is just there to kind of guide them and make sure they're within the parameters of the fund. Moving over to Capital Projects Fund, there's a couple different ways that revenues can get into that fund. Many times when we have voters pass a levy or a bond, the taxes from the levy go into the Capital Projects Fund, as well as when the bond is sold, the proceeds from that bond go directly into that Capital Projects Fund. Additionally, in some special circumstances, the state does have some situations where they will match certain projects. So, for example, we'll put $1 in, they'll put $1 in, sort of thing, up to a particular threshold. That you have to qualify, but it is in some cases an opportunity for some districts to see revenues that way. On the expenditure side of the Capital Projects Fund, those are for buildings and remodels and major projects. They are not for your, fixing a door handle, day-to-day maintenance type things. On the debt service fund there, that is just very, very much what it says there. So the revenue for the debt service fund comes in. So when voters pass a bond, when the bond is sold, the bond proceeds go into the Capital Projects Fund. But then as the voters pay back the bond through their property taxes, those taxes go into the debt service fund. And then once the money is into the debt service fund, then the district pays the principal and interest back on the bonds. So that's really just where we service the debt in that fund. Moving over to Private Purpose Trust Fund, that is truly just, it is a trust fund. individuals or groups will donate money for various reasons. I'm going to use a scholarship for an example. A family could, in the name of a loved one or in honoring someone, would, give a principal amount donation to the private purpose trust fund, and they may say, we want this money to go toward scholarships for seniors, and the donor has the ability to say, I don't care how you spend it, just spend it down until it's gone. Or the donor can say, I want the recipient of these dollars to have a minimum grade point average, or I want them to play a specific sport, or I want them to play a certain instrument, things like that. That can be the prerogative of the donor. And then the district helps with those scholarships, and the donor is generally notified and is involved in that process also. Can be, I should say, involved in that process. Moving over to the Transportation Vehicle Fund, that is a fund where we basically buy and sell yellow school buses. The funds get into that or into that account or fund through state depreciation on our current school buses. That is a revenue source for us, and then we buy new school buses annually. And I think annually I want to say we buy somewhere between uh, 9 and 12 school buses a year, I think. Um, I apologize. I'm just going off the back of my head on that one. So anyway, additionally, the major maintenance and repairs, like major ones on school buses, is allowed the expenditures to come out of that fund. However, your, tire changes or oil changes and tire rotation, those kinds of regular maintenance are not allowed to come out of that fund. I want to say one more thing on the transportation vehicle fund. So in the private sector, generally depreciation is considered, an expenditure or maybe a tax write-off, things like that. At the school district level, it's actually a revenue source from OSPI. So it's an expenditure at OSPI's level, but it's revenue at the district level. And then lastly, we have the general fund. The general fund is the least restrictive fund that we have, and the majority of our day-to-day operations happen in the general fund. As we move forward with the Budget Advisory Committee and the conversations of the different programs and so forth in it, the general fund will be where those items live. Want to point out down here at the bottom again, if you go to that same location that I spoke of on the prior slide for our website, there's also a video out there that is similar in nature to this video about our different revenue streams and things like that. I made it a few years ago, so I think there's one mention of 18-19 school year in there, but all the other areas are applicable and still consistent. So if you'd like, there's just an additional resource out there, and I wanted to point that out. Okay, moving right along. So when we talk about revenue sources for all those different funds, there are 6 main categories, if you will, of how those funds come into our system. First, we start with the local taxpayers. We have local school district collections. There's federal agency revenues, Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction, OSPI, or the state, you'll hear us refer to a lot. Other entities, maybe private foundations or communities services that may either grant us money or donate money. And then at the bottom there, other financing sources would be if we sell equipment, or those bond sales, for example, would be a way for revenues to come into the district. They would go into the capital projects fund. And then also in very few, very specific, I should say, circumstances, we are allowed to transfer between certain funds. There's a lot of rules and guidelines around that, but sometimes a fund can transfer money into another fund. It can either and expect the money to be paid back, or in some circumstances, it could just be gifted over. So again, it's not super common, but it is allowed in very certain circumstances. So that could be revenue for that particular fund potentially. When we talk about once the money gets into the system or the district, we need to be mindful about what color of the money is. That's the term we use. And really what that means is the green, for example, the top there, we don't have a lot of strings. the district has the freedom to spend those dollars how they see fit. And those are usually your state dollars coming in for our regular enrollment related apportionment. Down in the red, the categorical, those are dollars that definitely have restrictions and strings associated, and we have to follow the guidelines that are provided by the categorical dollars themselves. Then thirdly, we have local support, which would be our enrichment, and that would be our maintenance and operations levy tax, or that the voters generously support us with. And those dollars are yellow in that they, for the most part, are free for us to use as the district sees fit. However, they must be for enrichment. So there's some guidance there, but there's freedom once you hit that threshold of, is this enrichment? Okay, now what kind of enrichment? That's up to the district. And then over on the other fund side there, the capital projects, transportation, vehicle, ASB, and private purpose, definitely those are red. They have very specific rules and guidelines around how those dollars should be spent once they're into those funds. To dig down a little bit deeper on the different types of revenues, to start out with our local taxpayer revenue, there are property taxes. And thanks to our generous Tacoma voters, we have passed bonds and levies. When I first got into the school district finance, I used to get confused between bonds and levies, like which one, what's the difference, right? And someone told me early on that a bond is for building and levies are for learning. And I was always stuck with me. And so a bond would be, for the building the schools, the major remodels, things like that. And your levies, depending on, there are 4 types of levies you see there down below. Depending on what type of levy the district goes out for and what the voters approve, there would be natural expectations around those dollars based on the type of levy we have. So if it's capital projects, transportation, or technology level, those would be red in that, again, district has to abide by what they promise the voter. And then the maintenance and operation levy is yellow in that if passed, it needs to be used on enrichment. But again, what type of enrichment is up to the district. So I just want to take this opportunity we have very generous voters in Tacoma, and we are very thankful that you pass our bonds and levies that we go out for and trust us with your dollars. We're very thankful for that, and appreciate you helping us move the students forward. When we talk about local school district collections, that's just basically local receipts, right? Anything collected at a building. So under those, there you got the local support non-tax and then other school districts. Under the local support non-tax, those are your library fines, your classroom fees. If you take an art class or something, there's a supply fee potentially, your school lunch receipts for, anyone buying school lunch. And then those dollars are green in that, we, once they come into the system, we can do as we see fit with them. Now, if a student accidentally loses a library book and there's a fine associated, we're going to take those funds and we're going to replace the library book, right? That's just naturally what we would do. And also the school lunch receipts, for example, we would take those receipts and revenues and put them back into the food service program. But if activity receipts from ASB, for example, would be collected at the local level, although those are red, they need to go back into that ASB fund and then be treated within the guidelines of the ASB fund. Under the other school districts, we often go into something called an inter-district agreement. And what that is essentially is another school district, usually smaller ones, will come to us because they don't have the resources to serve a student um, for whatever the particular need is. And so we will enter into an agreement with that school district, and then we become the serving district for that student. And then the homeschool or the residing school actually pays us to serve their student for them. So that is an example of an interdistrict agreement. Moving over to federal revenues, there's 2 main flows that those federal dollars get into the school district's bank accounts. On the left there, the money can flow through OSPI and then come to us in our monthly apportionment report, or sometimes the money will come directly from a federal agency such as the Department of Ed. The majority of our federal dollars, though, do come on the left-hand side there through the OSPI special purpose flow through. Uh, on the state OSPI revenue, we receive monthly something called an apportionment report, and that is where the state will provide us funds monthly, or our revenues on a monthly basis based on what we're reporting to them. And different types of revenues are on the state apportionment report. And at the top there under state revenue, there's a state revenue general purpose and a state revenue special purpose. Now, the state revenue general purpose you'll see is green. And that, again, we have some freedoms around how we spend those dollars, although there are some state revenue special purpose. And those have very intentional uses for those dollars. And we are expected to abide and be compliant with those, of course. And then under the federal revenue, it's similarly general purpose and special purpose as well. We do have a few dollars that are in the general purpose federal revenue. However, the majority of our revenue, federal revenue is in the special purpose flow through. Something else just to let you know, the thing with those red state and federal revenue is if for some reason we don't spend the money, either as it was intended. Um, we are audited, of course, and they come through. And if they find that we're not spending the money as intended, then they will take back the money and either fine us or just take it back and remove it from our bank account. So that is always an incentive to make sure we are responsible and good stewards of these dollars. This is just a quick sample of the different areas or items that are included on our state apportionment report that comes monthly. And I just wanted to highlight for you the areas in red. So those represent either state or federal special purpose revenue sources. So your career and technical ed, the majority of that is a state special purpose. There is a little bit of federal special purpose in CTE, but not the majority is in state. Grants administration can be both depending on the grant. School food service revenue, again, can be both state and federal. Special education can also be both. Learning assistance, that is a state special purpose program. Transitional bilingual has a federal component, but also the majority of it is state. Highly capable is state. And then down under state institutions, that is here in Tacoma, we have the opportunity to serve students who are incarcerated at Raymond Hall. And those state institution dollars come in. There's some federal dollars that come in to help support us with those educational needs. And then down there at the bottom, transportation operations and depreciation allocations. So the transportation operations is a special purpose state revenue. The depreciation allocation is a special purpose state revenue. However, that depreciation allocation goes into this transportation vehicle fund, where all these other ones are going into the general fund. So just kind of an information there. That is about all I have for you today. If you have any questions, as always, here's some contacts. If you could feel free to reach out and ask us, or we can talk at our next meeting. Rosalind Medina, our Chief Financial Officer, there's her contact information. There's myself, Kristin Bell, and then Mary Kate Richardson, our Management and Operations Analyst, is also available to help you if you have questions. So thank you for listening, and I look forward to seeing you at our next presentation. Thank you. Bye-bye.